Welcome back. In this film, I'm going to show you an experiment or experimental footage of an electron vortex that I decided to make one day. In a moment of inspiration, I realized that I had the parts to make this vortex, and it was just a matter of setting it up, using a little bit of creativity and the principles of how to set up an electron vortex. So basically, what I did, or the idea behind this, was to artificially stimulate a vortex inside of a pyramid, the hyperdimensional vortex in a pyramid, but using electrons to get that to happen. So using the flow of electrons in a vortex to stimulate a hyperdimensional vortex in a pyramid, or an energetic vortex of ether in the center of a pyramid, using electrons to entrain the pathway. So I used my large pyramid vacuum chamber, my 30mm thick acrylic pyramid vacuum chamber, as the medium to house the vacuum. And within that, I placed one of my copper frames that has the same angle as that pyramid vacuum chamber. So being copper, obviously, it's made of metal and it's conductive. The way the electrons work is that, contrary to what most people are aware of, physics made a little mistake with the way electrons flow as per illustrated in a circuit. So it is known, but not labeled correctly in physics. The fact is that electrons move and pass away from the negative terminal in a circuit. So if there is a gap in a circuit, or just looking at a circuit in wires, it will travel. Say if this is a battery, which in this case it's a power source. If this was a battery, the electrons would travel from the negative terminal back to the positive in this direction. And for setting up vortexes, this is important to know, because you want the electrons to flow a specific way so that you can entrain the vortex a specific way. So the negative terminal is represented right here, and the electrons come from this high voltage power supply, which is 20,000 volts DC, and travel down this wire into the vacuum chamber and are connected to the copper frame here. So this copper frame inside the vacuum chamber, which is set to approximately 1,000 microns for this chamber, all of a sudden the electrons in the negative terminal are connected to the copper frame and leads, uninsulated wires that run from the 5 corners of the pyramid, closer towards the center. And the reason for this is that if these wires weren't here for this experiment, the electrons would start conducting from the frame edge. But we want them to run from the corners, because that's where the hyperdimensional energy is going to run also. So they're set to come in to approximately half the distance between the corner to the center. So from the corners, say if that's the apex corner, in the center, the wires come approximately halfway. And so what happens is this space is evacuated so that this voltage, this 20,000 volts DC, can arc or ionize the gases inside this pyramid. In this experiment, it is just the atmosphere, so mostly nitrogen gas. And they're going to move from the ends of each of these leads, or these wires, exposed copper wires, to the very center. And what you see here, quite specifically, is this is known as the cathode terminal. These are all the cathode terminals. This is the anode. So this is the anode, and it is actually just a little point of copper that I've insulated all the way down here outside of the machine, back to the power supply, which goes back into positive to the power supply. And it's insulated so that these electrons are forced to accumulate at the very center. They're going to accumulate here, and so there's just a very small amount of copper exposed here at the harmonic center of this pyramid and vacuum chamber. So the electrons flow to that center point. And what's set up around that central anode terminal is ring magnets, 2 ring magnets, orientated north. So north, they're pointing upwards. North is pointing upwards towards the apex of the pyramid. And these magnets and this electron configuration allows for an electron vortex to be set up. So the magnets quite simply polarize more or less the electrons to cause them to spin in a uniform fashion. The magnetic field is entraining them to operate on that axis where the magnetic field flows. And so by setting up this electron vortex, which can be done in many other ways, all I've done here is set it up inside a pyramid system in the hope that it would accumulate some hyperdimensional energy as well, quite simply by following the same path as the electrons are configured. So I've also placed in here, for curiosity purposes, just a small quartz crystal, the Herkimer diamond, named quartz crystal because it's naturally grown in a double terminated fashion, just hanging on some string. This was just for a bit of fun, so that's not really essential, but it is featured in the film, so I've also illustrated it in this diagram. So yeah, it was a fun little experiment. There is no mathematics behind this experiment. It was just for pure curiosity. I wanted to see the way the electrons responded visually, which you can see quite clearly in the film. And it's quite interesting to look at the different effects and what the vortex visually looks like inside. But in saying this, because of the fact that the pyramid chamber was so thick, I don't think that this system worked as well as what I had hoped it would. And so I didn't get the results in which I was looking for. But it was a very fun experiment nonetheless. And it is not really related to what I am trying to create in regards to a true hyperdimensional pyramid. It is more in the class of the video of the coil vortex, the delta T antenna. It is in an experimental class. Again, in that film, the concept is to trying to entrain the ethers to vortex using a rotating magnetic field through stimulated coils. This is the same concept except using an electron vortex instead of rotating fields using coils or using electrons. So again, it's an artificial way to stimulate the vortex in the pyramid using just power, lots of power, and just pushing it into a system. But it is not the way these systems really work or want to work. But either way, it was a fun experiment and a good way to creatively express the fusion between an electron vortex within a pyramid-shaped structure. So I'll put the film on and I hope you enjoy.